Món quà nào ý nghĩa nhất cho cha mẹ? Đó là chiếc ghế massage vật lý trị liệu của Luraco được sản xuất tại Hoa Kỳ, là ghế duy nhất được phục vụ cho quân đội Hoa Kỳ. Ghế Luraco vinh dự nhận giải Top Medical Massage Chair tại Hollywood.
Happy Mother's Day! Kính mời quý đồng hương vào thăm trang nhà TRspodUSA.com để thưởng thức chương trình tân cổ nhạc đặc sắc mừng ngày lễ mẹ và hãy trao tặng mẹ những món quà thiết thực từ TRDorszáC.
Ghế massage Sinca made in Japan với tuyệt chiêu kéo giãn gân cốt, xoa bóp, sưởi ấm, bấm huyệt từ lòng bàn chân đến thắt lưng, vai cổ. 5 năm warranty, giá 10.000, sale chỉ 6.499 đồng.
Xin ghé thăm các chi nhánh TRDorszáC địa phương hoặc gọi 877 892 6999.
Kính mời quý đồng hương ghé thăm chi nhánh mới của TRDorszáC trên đường Bosa, Cốc Magnolia, trong khu tượng Đức Thánh Trần, 714 898 6999.
Trang nhà TRspodUSA.com. Happy Mother's Day! Hãy mua tặng mẹ những món quà thiết thực từ TRDorszáC.
Nệm cứng chống đau lưng Luxury Lamborghini phủ bạc giúp cho khí huyết lưu thông điều hòa, mùa đông ấm áp, mùa hè mát mẻ. 20 năm warranty, chỉ 154 đồng một tháng, 4 năm không tiền lời.
Ghế massage Oco làm tay Nhật tốt nhất thế giới, hai cánh tay mở đóng như cửa xe hơi, xóa tan mệt mỏi, trị liệu đau nhức rất tuyệt vời. Được bớt 2.500 đồng, chỉ 209 đồng một tháng, hoặc được tặng cặp gối Lamborghini Italy 800 đồng.
TRDorszáC trên đường Bosa, Cốc Magnolia, trong khu tượng Đức Thánh Trần, 714 898 6999.
Trang nhà TRspodUSA.com.
Happy Mother's Day! Hãy trao tặng mẹ những món quà thiết thực từ TRDorszáC.
Ghế massage Oco làm tay Nhật tốt nhất thế giới, hai cánh tay mở đóng như cửa xe hơi, xóa tan mệt mỏi, trị liệu đau nhức rất tuyệt vời. Được bớt 2.500 đồng, trả góp 4 năm không tiền lời, chỉ 209 đồng một tháng, hoặc được tặng cặp gối Lamborghini Italy 800 đồng.
Ghế massage Sinca made in Japan với tuyệt chiêu kéo giãn gân cốt, xoa bóp, sưởi ấm, bấm huyệt từ lòng bàn chân đến thắt lưng, vai cổ. 5 năm warranty, giá 10.000, sale chỉ 6.499 đồng.
Xin ghé thăm các chi nhánh TRDorszáC địa phương hoặc gọi 877 892 6999.
Trang nhà TRspodUSA.com.
Này công dân ơi, đứng lên đáp lời sông núi, đồng lòng cùng đi, hy sinh tiếc gì hơn sao? Vì tương lai quốc dân cùng sống qua khói tinh, làm sao cho núi sông từ nay luôn vững bền, dù cho thấy phơi trên tương giao. Đủ nước lấy máu nào đem bao, nòi sông nước biển mãi cần giải nguy, người công dân luôn vững bền tâm trí, cùng chan quyết chiến đấu làm cho các nơi vang tiếng người nước Nam cho đến muôn đời. Công dân ơi, mau đi tận dưới cờ, công dân ơi, mau làm cho cõi đời thoát cơn tàn phá bé bàng, cõi dấu xứng danh Việt Nam không dấu làm
And now let us observe a brief moment of silence to honor all the fallen heroes and victims of the Vietnam War, all Vietnamese refugees who have lost their life in the journey to freedom, all freedom fighters, and all victims of communism. Thank you, everyone. Let me start the main part of our event today. I would like to introduce người, President of Voice of Vietnamese Americans, and Ginny is going to deliver the opening remark to start the event today.
Honored guests, our fellow Vietnamese Americans, today, Vietnamese Americans nationwide commemorate the 46th anniversary of our journey to freedom, fleeing communism in Vietnam since 1975. The 111th US Congress designated May the 2nd Vietnamese Refugees Day to recognize the Vietnamese refugees who risked their lives for freedom after April 30th, 1975, when Vietnam was invaded by communism. Vietnamese Americans have made significant contributions to the rich culture and economic prosperity of the United States. Vietnamese Americans have distinguished themselves in the fields of literature, the arts, science, and athletics, including actors and actresses, physicists, astronauts, and Olympic athletes. As Vietnamese Americans, we would like to express our sincere gratitude to all who have helped us throughout this difficult journey. To name a few, are President Ford, President Carter, who pushed for the Refugee Act 1980, Senator McCain, Senator Webb, and countless other Americans who have opened their hearts to sponsor Vietnamese refugees into their families. We also mourn the recent passing of former Vice President Walter Mondale. We are forever grateful to his leadership in rescuing the Vietnamese boat people who were drowning in the open seas. May his legacy continue to guide our hearts in raising the torch of freedom for all humans in despair, fleeing tyranny for a more democratic society. Most recently, many senators, led by Senators Hirono and Harris, and representatives led by Congressman Lowenthal, have raised voices against the deportation of Vietnamese refugees back to Vietnam, a hostile country from which they fled. As Vietnamese Americans are very concerned about deteriorating human rights in Vietnam, the unjust imprisonment of journalists and political dissidents, and the increasing aggressiveness of Chinese Communist Party in its attempts to control the Southeast Asia Sea and the Indo-Pacific region. We share the existential threat of climate change in the US, as well as in the lower Mekong River basin. We support the US government in good policies to combat climate change and to curb the Chinese Communist Party's expansionism that threatens Vietnam's independence and the preservation of Vietnam's Mekong River Delta. Now, as Americans, we commit to pay forward, to honor, defend, and protect the American values, to fight for freedom and democracy. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many Vietnamese American medical staffs had worked at the front line. At the same time, many Vietnamese American businesses, such as nail salons and restaurants, also turned their shops into making masks and providing thousands of meals for free for the frontline workers. May is also the Heritage Month of Asian Americans. As the fourth largest population among Asian Pacific Americans, Vietnamese Americans have had our share of racial discrimination. We mourn the senseless loss of John Huỳnh, Shane Nguyen, and THịO, who were tragically murdered in the spate of recent hate crimes against Asian Americans. We mourn many others who have suffered at the hand of bigotry before them. We stand in solidarity with all Asian Americans and Americans at large to reject anti-Asian hate, racial discrimination, and violent crimes. We applaud the US Congress for having recently passed the Anti-Asian Hate Crimes Act. We hope that this is the beginning of a continued conversation in search of a brighter, safer future for all Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Today, we invite you to join us in this virtual conference, looking back, moving forward, to identify challenges we are still facing in our journey to freedom. At this conference, the focus will be on a variety of topics concerning the Vietnamese American community. This includes empowering the young generation to move forward to the next phase of the journey. We still need to have more representation, to have a stronger acceptance into mainstream society. We need to lessen the generational gap within our own community and strengthen the consensus to protect our core values. Together, we will make this a better world with more freedom and justice for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginny. Now it is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker of today's event, the Honorable Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia. Tim Kaine was the 70th governor of Virginia and the Democratic Vice President candidate in 2016. He's on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and has strongly championed human rights in Vietnam, as well as a strong pushback on the expansionism of the Chinese Communist Party in the Southeast China Sea. Please welcome Senator Tim Kaine.
Hey everybody, Senator Tim Kaine here. Thanks for inviting me to speak with you all. I am really honored by the opportunity to celebrate Virginia's Vietnamese American community and to just reflect on and applaud your journey in strengthening our great Commonwealth and our great country. 46 years ago, hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese refugees came to the United States after the fall of Saigon in 1975. Many of those first arrived empty-handed, deeply affected by the wounds of war, whose consequences went beyond the confines of a traditional battlefield. These men and women and their families understood intimately that war is often a destroyer or separator of families. It can change the trajectory of one's life, and its legacy, that legacy of war and separation, remains in those who experience it firsthand. But these same individuals who came to the United States then and years to follow maintained a deep belief in America's possibilities. They saw our nation as a beacon of hope and opportunity and freedom, even when it wasn't always easy to do so. As you all know, and it's sad to reflect back on this, many who came were not initially welcomed. They faced hostility, racism, sometimes subtle and subconscious misunderstandings, and numerous barriers to their success. But despite all that, as with immigrant communities before, our Vietnamese American refugee families persevered with an amazing and quintessential American attitude that it shouldn't matter where you come from, but instead it matters where you want to go. Today, Vietnamese Americans are an invaluable part of Virginia and our country. Your business leaders and frontline workers in Arlington, your public servants and community organizers in Richmond, your veterans and educators in Hampton Roads. You enrich every single corner of Virginia. Despite the rich diversity, the past year has shown that hate and misunderstanding still is not defeated. I'm deeply disturbed by the rise in anti-Asian bigotry and violence we're seeing all across the country. I stand in solidarity with our AAPI community, and I'm committed to combating hate in all of its forms. Last March, the FBI warned of a potential surge in hate crime incidents against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders as the coronavirus spread. Since then, nearly 3,000 firsthand accounts of anti-Asian discrimination have been reported to federal agencies, including some mystifying and shocking recent assaults against AAPI senior citizens. To help address the ongoing attacks, President Biden issued a presidential memorandum to condemn racism and intolerance against members of the AAPI community. Congress also has a role in combating hate, and I'm a proud co-sponsor of Senators Hirono's and Duckworth's COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. This bill requires the Attorney General to designate a person whose sole responsibility will be to expedite review of hate crimes that may stem from misinformation about COVID-19 and try to both report and then come up with strategies to reduce hate crimes. The bill also requires the Attorney General to issue guidance to state and local law enforcement on culturally appropriate public education campaigns and the collection of data. I'm very heartened by the fact that the Senate approved the passage of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act by a vote of 94-1. It was combined with another bill that I co-sponsored called the No Hate Act, named in part after Virginian Heather Heyer, who was killed in the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in August of 2017. Together, these bills demonstrate a strong bipartisan consensus, and that's really important, that we support the AAPI community and that we want to be a commonwealth and country where hate has no refuge. As we look toward the years to come, I know the Vietnamese American community will continue to uplift America in these unprecedented times. Our country has to grow in new and exciting ways to meet the technological and economic and geopolitical challenges of our time, and our Vietnamese American community will be integral to that process and integral to that progress. As a bridge between the United States and Vietnam, your hard work and commitment to freedom, democracy, and diversity has strengthened the broader U.S.-Vietnam relationship. But there's so much more to do, because while we celebrate Vietnam's economic growth, we also have to have honest discussions about the power of universal human rights and the need to increase those rights in Vietnam. And your strong advocacy can be so important in doing that. In fact, already your activism continues to inspire debate in Congress over ways we can improve the human rights situation in Vietnam. I'm eternally grateful for Virginia's vibrant Vietnamese American community. Because of all of you, our diversity continues after 240 years to be our greatest strength. The blend of cultures and traditions is what makes our country so special. And I thank you for all the work you do in Virginia, and I thank you again for letting me speak with you today. I wish for all of us many, many years of prosperity, peace, potential, as we work together to build a greater commonwealth and country for all.
Thank you, Senator Tim Kaine, for taking the time from your schedule to speak to us today in our event. We appreciate it. Next, I am very thrilled and honored to introduce the next speaker, next keynote speaker of our event, U.S. Congresswoman Stephanie Yung Murphy. Stephanie is a trailblazer. She's the very first Vietnamese American woman elected to the House of Representatives in the U.S. Congress. Please welcome Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy.
Hi everyone, I'm Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy and I represent Florida's 7th District in Orlando. I'm excited to be a part of this event and thankful that so many of you are tuned in to honor and celebrate Vietnamese refugees. When I was just a baby, my family fled the communist regime in Vietnam. And along the way, our boat got stranded and we were rescued by the US Navy and offered safe haven in the United States. Like so many refugees, my parents didn't speak English and had to work several jobs to get by. I was lucky to learn English at school and had the opportunity to go to college because of how hard my parents worked to support us. And now I'm proud to be the first Vietnamese American woman elected to Congress. My parents escaped tyranny and cherished the opportunity to be part of the American democracy. But for so many families like mine, our experience has not been without its challenges. Over the last year, discrimination and attacks against the AAPI community have grown tremendously, ranging from hateful rhetoric to violent assaults. It makes me sad to see the progress our community has made over the past few decades be eroded because of hatred and politics. We must do better. Elected leaders, including some of my colleagues, need to stop using dangerous rhetoric that is putting a target on the back of Asian Americans. This language has fueled an increase of threats and attacks against those of Asian descent, and many Asian Americans continue to live in fear because of it. Recently, the Senate took bipartisan action to prevent and prosecute crimes against the Asian community. I look forward to voting for this bill in the House and sending it to the President's desk. This is a good first step. We must continue to reject hatred and hold our leaders accountable for their action and their language. I look forward to continue using my platform as an immigrant, refugee, and a Vietnamese American woman in politics to uplift voices in the AAPI community. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy, for being a trailblazer and such an inspiration for all of us. We hope that the younger Vietnamese American will follow your footsteps and follow your devotion in public service. Thank you. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our next generation leader, THÜIO or THảIO. Was born in Vietnam and grew up in the United States. She graduated from the University of California in May 2020 with a bachelor degree in international relations and global business. THÜIO currently works as a risk consultant for the Fortune 500 firm. During the summer of 2020, THÜIO founded a group called người, Việt, or the Interpreter, alongside USC fellow J.D. Chain. Growing up, THÜIO has always felt like the connection with the Vietnamese language has impeded her from thriving in the American society. However, this perceived weakness and has become a unique strength and allowing her to be the ambassador of sort, a bridge across the Vietnamese-speaking older generation and the younger, the more Americanized generation, the first generation of Vietnamese American. THÜIO is very passionate about politics and hopes to empower Vietnamese Americans, young Vietnamese American everywhere to participate in the political process of our country. THÜIO, welcome.
Thank you so much, Anton, for the warm introduction. I'm so honored to be here today to represent the first generation of Vietnamese Americans at this prestigious conference. To begin with, I'd like to share with you a video clip made by my friend, Kaine, who is unable to be here today, unfortunately. The clip is a moving call to action and unity against anti-Asian violence, which has been fast growing across the United States. Here's what Kaine wrote when she made this clip. And I'd like to read in Vietnamese her words. Tôi sinh ra và lớn lên ở Sài Gòn. Do đó, có thể nói tôi là thế hệ trưởng thành sau biến cố 30 tháng 4 năm 1975. Tôi may mắn hơn triệu người dân Việt trong giai đoạn bỏ xứ ra đi, đánh đổi sinh mạng để đến bến bờ tự do. Tôi may mắn được có cơ hội tìm hiểu, ghi nhận nhiều ký ức vượt biển của những thuyền nhân sống sót trong cuộc chạy trốn vĩ đại của dân tộc Việt Nam. Từ đó, tôi cũng được chia sẻ những thành công nơi xứ người của họ và thế hệ sau. Mỗi câu chuyện là một kỷ niệm buồn. Mỗi kỷ niệm buồn là một nền tảng cho niềm tự hào của người Việt Nam vì họ đã và đang thành công, đóng góp lương tri và trí thức trên đất Mỹ. Nhưng bên cạnh những thành công rực rỡ đó là một nỗi đau âm ỉ khác mà bất cứ chúng ta, bất cứ người gốc Á nào cũng có thể trở thành nạn nhân. And please run the clip.
Sau khi con bị giết, gia đình mình thay đổi rất nhiều. Mặc dù những sinh hoạt vẫn bình thường, ba mẹ vẫn phải đi làm y như trước, các em vẫn đi học, nhưng thiếu con. Ba mẹ và các em sống như ở địa ngục, ngày qua tháng lại, từng giờ từng phút. Ba mẹ rất nhớ con, thương con.
January at 7 o'clock in the morning, when we went out of house, and he was asleep, but he woke up and he followed us to ask us what we need him to do today. And I said I need him to open the store only, and to stay around there by 1 hour, and you can go where you want and come back home. And then we came back home about 2 o'clock. I was happy. I saw his car parked on the street before, in front of the house.
One regret that I feel strongly about is not telling you that I loved you. I know our family wasn't as close as you or I would like it to be, but I want you to know that in my heart, I've always loved you.
Those words did come out of the former president's mouth, you know, and people that do follow him obviously got that from him. So, you know, it did start, you know, up top from the leadership, and it kind of trickled down to everybody else, you know. So, I didn't think it was appropriate for him to make those comments and name it what he did name it, but, you know, at the end of the day, I don't write his messages. I don't write his interviews. So, you know, that's his feeling on it. That's his take on it. I don't agree with it. You know, and I do believe it did cause problems. And you know, this is kind of the reason where we are right now. Oh, absolutely. I've been saying that it's going to escalate. It's going to escalate to a point. You know, and I've been saying this. You know, it's not a surprise that it has escalated to this point. You know, this is why we need to have more awareness on these situations. I don't know if there's going to be any copycat type attacks, and that's my concern right now.
Wow, that is quite upsetting to witness, and I'm sure if you've been following the news recently, you know, I'm sure you can empathize with that feeling, knowing that Vietnamese Americans are among those who have been brutally targeted by those who deemed us as others, unworthy of existing on this land that we have called home for almost half a century. So I believe that it is up to us to raise our voices, defend ourselves, and advocate for our interests within the fabric of American politics. And most importantly, we need more representation at all levels. That is why I am so proud to introduce to you many of our Vietnamese American elected officials in the state legislature from Massachusetts to Georgia to Virginia. As young leaders from both parties, they were refugees at a very young age or children of refugees who crossed the Pacific Ocean in search of hope. Please join me in hearing their remarkable stories. I would like to just address something. A guest in the audience asked whether we have an agenda open to the public. We apologize as we weren't able to craft one ready for publication. But this next part in the program is going to be the panel between the elected officials that I previously mentioned. All right, so on this panel, we have former Massachusetts Senator Dean Trong, incumbent Massachusetts Representative Jung Nguyen, Georgia Representative Bee Nguyen, and Virginia State Delegate Kathy Chung. Each elected official will deliver a 5-minute remark. After that, we will have a Q&A session with the audience. So please do send in your question either in the comment section of the live stream or the Q&A portion of this Zoom webinar. First, I would like to introduce former State Senator Dean Tran.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, go
good
for it.
And I will make some comments. I don't believe my comments will be 5 minutes long. But again, good afternoon from the East Coast, and thank you very much for having me. I would say 2 days ago, we observed Black April, which marks the fall of Vietnam to communism. It was a travesty that we lost our country, and afterwards, many of us, probably everyone here on this panel, as well as everyone joining us, we struggled for years. Like many, I was one of the boat people and lived in a refugee camp before emigrating to the United States. Even though we observe April 30th, we should also celebrate it. It was a day that gave us the freedom, the liberty, the justice, and equality that we all have and enjoy in this greatest country in the world that we now call home. But today, we find ourselves in a renewed fight to keep freedom, liberty, justice, and equality, because our government continues to adopt policies that mirror those of communism and creating an environment that is oppressive to the Asian communities. Many of these policies put other races and ethnicities before us, ignoring our existence, and are discriminatory toward Asians in the workplace and schools. For example, many colleges now practice a quota system where the number of Asians are limited to enrollment. These policies are most detrimental to the Vietnamese community. So Black April reminds us why we fled from communism, and that is to seek opportunities for a better life and to have a brighter future for our children. So while we continue to observe and celebrate the country that we left, we must not forget that the United States of America is our country now. And we must stand up and fight for the freedom, liberty, justice, and equality that this country has to offer, and not allow us to be treated as second citizen. So again, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for the remarks, Senator Dean Tran. And up next, we have the presence of Representative Jung Nguyen. Jung Nguyen is currently the state representative for the 18th Essex District. She's a first-generation Vietnamese American immigrant and was the first person in her family to have graduated from college and law school. She earned a bachelor's degree from Tufts University and a JD from Northeastern University School of Law. Please join me, TRspodChamp Nguyen. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Cookie, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Xin kính chào quý vị. Thank you so much to Voice for Vietnamese Americans for planning this virtual event and for inviting me to participate in this panel. I truly appreciate this opportunity for all of us to reflect on the journey to freedom and what it means for Vietnamese Americans 46 years after the fall of Saigon, when so many had to leave behind everything and risk everything to find freedom elsewhere across the globe. I came to the United States in 1992 when I was just 5 years old with my family as political refugees, as I'm sure many of you can relate. My father served in Quân lực Việt Nam Cộng hòa as a sĩ quan cảnh sát, fighting for democracy, liberty, and freedom. After the war, he was forced into the re-education camp for more than 8 years. And we came to the United States with less than $100 to our name and have been here ever since. And as many of us know, as immigrants, my parents had to work 2 to 3 jobs while taking classes to learn English. And my parents had to work very long hours at odd jobs that had very little benefits and job security, but they did everything that they could to give me and my 2 sisters the opportunities that they never had. And this selflessness I saw in my parents led me to pursue a career in public service as a legal services attorney at a nonprofit where I provided free legal representation to vulnerable populations. I represented survivors of domestic violence, seniors, veterans, people with disabilities, low-wage workers, and new immigrants, mostly Vietnamese-speaking immigrants. And I advocated for policies at the state capitol, helping to secure passage of legislation such as paid family medical leave, bilingual education, and earned income tax credit, all to benefit new immigrants and people from vulnerable communities. And from this experience, I rose into my current position as the first Vietnamese American Massachusetts state representative and the first Vietnamese American woman ever elected in our state. And I continue to fight this day for issues relating to gender, racial, economic, environmental justice, public education, language access, healthcare, and so much more. I'm so humbled to carry this responsibility and amplify the cause of Vietnamese Americans and other people of color, though I know I'm one of many voices now, as we're seeing so many others looking to run for office or now in office. And I'm so proud to serve with so many Vietnamese American electeds, many of whom are here today. We all know civic engagement is more important than ever in our community. This past year, indeed, has been so difficult for so many, including Vietnamese Americans, with our businesses, jobs, housing, family ties, and friendships tested by this pandemic. But additionally, as we saw in the video, like so many other Asian American groups, we've been impacted by the increase in anti-Asian harassment, violence, and pain that have resulted from racist, ignorant rhetoric and misinformation that have been circulated to scapegoat and blame people of Asian descent. But despite all this, 2020 was a year of amazing organizational efforts from our community. My gratitude goes out to countless Vietnamese American volunteers, poll workers, campaign staff, voters who helped and influenced others to register to vote, and people like Cookie and the Interpreter and other organizations that serve to bring information to the Vietnamese community so that we know how to rise up and create opportunities from challenges and crises. And so this year, the year of the ox, calls for resiliency, strength, and confidence. I encourage you all to continue educating your friends and family, get them excited about policy and help them get involved in public service that has had an impact on each of our everyday lives. Let's resolve to be more active than ever in raising awareness for the needs of our community members in this country. And I encourage you all to foster an environment where family members, peers, coworkers, and friends feel empowered to share their intergenerational perspectives and make sure that those perspectives are heard. Whether you're a grandparent, mother, father, aunt, uncle, or a young adult or teen, your voice and perspectives matter. And I hope that we will all be able to come together to have these very difficult conversations so that our community can come back together and be in solidarity with one another. And you can continue your advocacy and civic engagement by supporting policies that address hate and violence against our community, as well as policies that would uplift our community. For instance, I've filed a hate crimes bill to increase accountability. As you all know, hate crimes are not just against the individual. They are committed to create fear and make whole communities feel unsafe. These crimes are against all of us, and we need to hold perpetrators accountable to tell the community that we see them, that they are valued, and that we won't tolerate such hate and violence any longer, that we won't be invisible any longer. And I hope that you will continue to fight for these policies, whether at the state level or at the federal level. Though I do want to note that hate crimes are only one of many solutions. We need a multifaceted approach to deal with racism, hate, and be able to support communities like ours in more substantive ways. We need to work on issues of racial, social, economic, and gender justice, including fighting for equity in the areas of access to housing, transportation, healthcare, and other basic necessities. We also need to work on issues of language access to make sure that people in our community not only receive helpful information and resources, but that they can understand what's presented to them. Furthermore, we need to collect better data, especially disaggregated data that shows the full picture, that although many Vietnamese Americans are successful, there are still many of us, particularly our seniors and our newer immigrants, who need additional resources. And that depending on how and when you immigrated to the US, Asian Americans are not a monolith. Furthermore, we need to have better education for K-12 students to learn diverse and inclusive curriculum that's intentionally designed to avoid perpetuating gender, cultural, ethnic, or racial stereotypes and build racially and culturally responsive knowledge and combat racial and cultural bias. Lastly, we need to invest in community-based organizations to provide assistance and resources to vulnerable people, especially our seniors and our new immigrants and low-wage workers that we know still exist in our community. So I ran for office because I wanted to be an example for other women and people of color who had assumed that their voice don't matter. I wanted to run for office so that younger generations can see people like me striving to improve the world, and because I hope that they will do things that they're passionate about and take that leap of faith like me and so many others have done. So if you're interested in politics, get involved. If you want to run for office, reach out. I want to help you. I want to work with you to build a pipeline to get more Vietnamese Americans into leadership roles, not only in politics, but everywhere. You can help by supporting all of us in office, help us get elected, and help us move up into higher office. Volunteer, donate, follow us on social media, and amplify our messages. Now more than ever, we need to come together and influence this country, carving out our stake in the American dream. So thank you so much for joining us today at this virtual event. I feel amazing power in this room, and I feel inspired to do more. I am so excited for what the future has to hold, and I'm so proud to be Vietnamese Americans and be working with you all. Thank you.
Wow, such powerful words. Thank you so much, Representative Giang Nguyen. When you mentioned that you want to come into politics to empower generations of Vietnamese Americans behind you, I can assure you that we are looking at you, we're looking up to you, and we are feeling so empowered. Up next, I would like to introduce to you Representative Georgia State Representative Binh Nguyen, who recently came into her office just last year. Binh Nguyen is an American nonprofit executive and politician. She has been serving the 89th District of the Georgia House of Representatives since December 15, 2017. As a member of the Democratic Party, she was elected during a special election in December 2017 to fill the seat vacated following Stacey Abrams' resignation in August 2017 to focus on her run for governor. Binh Nguyen is the first Vietnamese American elected to the Georgia House of Representatives. Representative Binh Nguyen, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Cookie, it's nice to meet you in person. I have a little sister named Cookie. So I always get excited to see your name. Thank you everyone for having me on today. So I was the first Vietnamese American elected to the Georgia General Assembly out of our 200-year history. And when I first got elected in 2017, I was someone that people were not used to seeing in politics. And I think for me personally, I never envisioned that I would have any kind of political career. I grew up in Augusta, Georgia. My family came here in 1979. They were refugees who came over by boat. And for most of my life, my parents were very focused on making sure that we made good grades in school, and they really wanted us to stay out of trouble. They wanted us to keep our heads down and protect us from, any kind of, they wanted us to protect us from poverty, from violence, from conflict, things that they endured during their time in Vietnam. And so they had a very traditional pathway carved out for us. They said I could be a doctor or a lawyer. And then at the very worst, they said I could be an engineer or a pharmacist. So I struggled a lot with that because it wasn't what I wanted to be when I grew up. And even through college, I always loved reading and writing, and that was what I had an affinity for. And my parents could not understand, why in the world would you be an English major? Why would you pursue that for a living? And what is it that you're going to do with that English major? Because they were afraid that I would be financially insecure. And so the parameters that they gave me for who I wanted to be were very limited in scope. And that's part of, that is part of the messaging of the American dream. The things that immigrants aspire to achieve when they move to this country is that we aren't bound and limited by similar circumstances that our parents may have endured. It should be a nation in which we have choices and we can dream big, and we don't have to adhere to traditional thinking of like what success looks like or how our lives can be. And it was very hard for my parents to understand that. And I wanted to tell them, the reason that I'm choosing these things is because of the sacrifice that you made to come to this country that enables me to take different pathways, and to try and to fail, and then to fail and to succeed, and to change my mind and to envision other things. And I think a lot of children of immigrants struggle with that because we really want to respect and acknowledge the sacrifices that our parents made for us. And we really want to show that and demonstrate that through, graduating from high school, making good grades, and developing a really good career. And so it was a very emotional struggle that I had growing up, because on one hand, I wanted to do all of the things that my parents wanted me to do and expected me to do, to say, look, I understand what you gave for me. And because I love and care about you, and I want to show you that I recognize that, I want to do all the things that you want me to do. But I just had a different vision for myself. And along the way, I understood that I have to follow what it is that I'm most passionate about, what I love, because that's the environment that will allow me to thrive. I ended up starting a nonprofit, working in public schools for 10 years in Atlanta and DeKalb. And it was also hard because starting an organization on your own requires risk. And my parents did not want me to take those financial risks. And they couldn't quite understand why I wanted to work in public schools. But one of the reasons I did want to work in public schools is that we know that education is so instrumental. And when you attend a school that is underserved, then your chances decrease dramatically. And part of the role that schools have taken in our country is not just educating children, but also providing a lot of areas of supports for families that need it. For me, working in the classrooms with students, they reminded me so much of myself in terms of not quite understanding what we were good at, what we wanted to do, and what our place was in our society. I worked with a lot of kids who were children of immigrants, a lot of undocumented kids, and just saw how those systems really impact children's ability to be successful. One of the schools that I worked in had a graduation rate of 42% when I first entered. And when I left, that graduation rate had increased to over 70%. But one of the structural barriers in place is if you are undocumented in this country, until the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival was passed in 2012, you could not get a driver's license, a work permit, you could not go to college. So a lot of my students didn't see a future for themselves. And one thing that I always talk about is it's critically important for for those of us who had families who were able to attain citizenship and the legal ability to be in this country, it made a huge difference to be able to have that refugee status. But for many other people who are not able to get that same status, their parents fled for the same reasons ours did, which is escaping violence, escaping poverty, and really believing that they need to provide a better life in their families. And many of the students I work with, their families also made really deadly journeys across the Rio Grande, across the desert. And they had all of that secondhand trauma that so often so many of us feel through hearing the stories of our parents' lives, and then how those manifest into other things. It was really in public schools where I understood so fundamentally why it's important to change systems and why it is important to engage in policy, because it wasn't just not receiving a quality public education. My students didn't have healthcare. They didn't have access to transportation. They didn't have healthy foods. They were going home after school and taking care of their siblings instead of being able to study and graduate from high school. The second jobs that they had were to keep the lights on in their house. It wasn't like me when my first job working at the grocery store when I was 15 in Augusta, Georgia. The extra money I got, I could buy clothes with. It wasn't because I needed to give a paycheck to my parents to make sure that we could keep the lights on. And my parents did struggle economically. You know, I was a welfare baby born in 1981. My dad his first job in America was working as an orderly in a mental institution while he was going to school at nighttime. My mom, who was a social worker in Vietnam, didn't get the chance to go back to school and re-earn a degree here in the United States. And so I recognized that financial struggle, but by the time I was in high school, we were in a much better position than when I was a child. And there were certain parts of poverty, right? Like the poverty, like if you live in poverty, there are certain things that are carried on with you. Some examples that I have seen with my parents growing up, especially with my dad, is the inability to throw anything away. He wants to keep everything, save everything, fix everything. Something that, you know, I struggle with seeing with my mom and my older aunties, where if we gave them a bottle of perfume for Mother's Day, they would save it and never ever use it. And we said, what are you saving that for? You should use it now. You deserve that. And there's not a scarcity mentality that they've been so ingrained with. And so it was everything, you know, not using a new kitchen sponge because you still had the old one, even if the old one was falling apart. And so it's that mindset of scarcity that we all lived with for so long that my dad hasn't been able to break for himself. And it is hard because we're balancing life in America with a completely different culture. We spoke Vietnamese only in the household growing up. I took English as a second language when I was a child, even though I was born in America. I only speak Vietnamese with my parents now. And, you know, I think embracing that second language skill is incredibly important. I am so glad that my parents raised me to be bilingual, because then I could talk to my aunts and uncles who didn't learn how to speak English. And I see that gap generationally when some of the nephews aren't able to speak Vietnamese, or some of the second cousins aren't able to speak Vietnamese. But I was able to cultivate a more intimate relationship with some of my older relatives that the other generations weren't able to do. So that's been a really important part of my upbringing. But even though I'm bilingual, I'm illiterate. So if my mom texts me in Vietnamese, it takes me a long time to read and figure out what she's talking about. And then my vocabulary is very limited because I grew up speaking conversational Vietnamese as a child of two parents. And it does become harder to articulate when I'm speaking to my parents. If we get in a fight, all my words get jumbled up. I can't explain to them policy. I think for a long time, and probably now, they still don't fully understand what I do for a living because I don't have the language to be able to share with them, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, and this is why it's so important to me. And certainly part of that has been my political career. Like I said, I never envisioned myself to run for office because I never saw anybody that looked like me run for office. And it wasn't until I was doing this work in public schools and I thought, oh my gosh, all these people are making decisions that impact all of our lives, and they don't have the perspective to understand some of those decisions. And certainly part of that is what it is like to be, Asian American in the South, and how the policy decisions impact our community. But also, as I stated before, really being rooted in the work I did in public schools and just really caring so deeply about my students and their future. And so when I ran in 2017, it took a lot of people saying, you need to do this. I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. And we have our challenges too, because as a community, Asian Americans, up until recently in Georgia and across the country, we weren't voting in large numbers. And political giving is different because we didn't learn to politically give, and we're still learning why it's important to politically give. So we didn't have the same structures in place that make it easier for people to be able to be successful in politics. And I think that there's some fear related to it. The proximity for us in government, there's a lot of hesitation around that and mistrust, which is very understandable given some of the things that our families endured. And so when I finally decided to run, I represent a district that is majority Black and the rest of the constituency is white. It's probably like a 60-40 split, and very few Asian people in my district. My two sisters live there. I got their votes. But people said to me, who's going to vote for you? You don't have a base in your district. And I said, well, the people who care about the same values as I do, they're going to be the ones who vote for me. Because at the end of the day, we all want our kids to go to strong schools. We want our neighborhoods to be safe. We want access to health care. And we want to feel valued as human beings, knowing that we can exist on our own, we can exist safely. And that's something that is not happening for Asian Americans at this time. And it's not something that's happened for Asian Americans in the history of our country. It's not something that is happening for Black Americans in their history, as well as Latino Americans in their history. And so I ended up winning in 2017, a really competitive race. And I went door to door knocking. My team knocked 37,500 doors. I walked every single part of my district. I knocked doors every single day, met people where they were at their houses, and had real conversations with them. And I think that is what politics is about. It is about meeting people where they're at, having real life conversations with them. What is it that you care about? And having a tangible human being that they can connect to and relate to, standing on their doorstep and saying, here, I'm running for these reasons, and I'm going to be here for you if I win. It's just been an incredibly hard couple of years. I'm a Democrat serving in a Republican-led legislature that does see a lot of anti-immigrant legislation being introduced. And a lot of the times it's been playing defense and proactively fighting back against pieces of legislation and not being able to move forward things that I think would be a benefit, not just to the AAPI community, but to Georgia as a whole. And then obviously last year, we had a very contentious presidential election, a really contentious 2 U.S. Senate runoff seats here in the state of Georgia. And I found myself in committee battling, pushing back on and battling against people who were presenting misinformation and lies to our committee hearing. And one of the things that happened after that, because I did a lot of legwork around this, looking through a list of people who were alleged to have committed a felony by voting twice or not living in the state, even driving to my constituents' houses and making phone calls and verifying all this information that I presented to the committee in place. And as a result of that, I received death threats following that committee hearing. And we exist in a political time where if you stand up and you tell the truth or you push back on something, the consequences of that are greater than they ever have been in the past. And when it pertains to our elections and our democracy, there's nothing more important that we can do than to protect the right to vote and to protect the right to have a free and fair democracy in this country. And when we take steps back, it is very, very dangerous for everybody living in this country. And I think one of the things that has been really hard was January 6th, seeing the South Vietnamese flag flying at our nation's capital and having to really think about what that means for us and how we how we move forward as a community and why that was happening. And when I was sworn in for my next term in 2021, I wore an owl tie to my swearing in ceremony because I wanted to be like, I'm a Vietnamese American in this country, and I care about defending our democracy, and I am showing my allegiance as an American by doing so. And we had a very hard legislative session with all these voting bills that were on the table, but also the mass shooting that happened in Atlanta. And, I was fully aware that we had seen a rise in anti-AAPI hate crimes across the country. I had been reading about the things that were happening to people since the COVID-19 virus was labeled the China virus. I think all of us know that when rhetoric like that is used, it targets all of us, because when people look at us, they see us as being Asian. There's no way to distinguish if you're Vietnamese, if you're Chinese, if you're Japanese. We are all, we're a very diverse, multicultural AAPI group, but there's just no way for us to be able to distinguish each other. And quite frankly, it's not something that I would want anyway. I would not want us to try and single out anybody. I had seen all of those things manifest and had been reading about it in horror, but when it happened so close to home in such a brutal way and so incredibly violent, it was devastating. And I really spent during the time in which it happened, I tried to take every media call. I tried to take every interview because I wanted to make sure that the framing would still center AAPIs and it would center the victims and their families and not the other way around. And we saw such failures here in Atlanta. And I'll give you two examples, which y'all may have read about, but one, with the Cherokee County business, one of the men, his wife was dead inside of the spa, and they detained him and held him in the back of a police car for 3 or 4 hours. And he was a Spanish speaker, unable to communicate with a law enforcement officer. And I can't think of anything more traumatizing than to know your loved one lay dead inside a building and you're being detained and you don't have the language access to talk about it. And the same thing happened in Atlanta. One of the victims' husbands showed up, a Korean speaker, and his wife was, he tried to resuscitate her, and the presumption is she was probably already dead. And there was a language barrier there. He was not able to communicate with the Atlanta police officer that was, that responded to the scene of the crime. And again, that intense trauma of not being able in, a horrifying moment, not being able to seek the help from the people who were supposed to seek you, who are supposed to help you, because there was a breakdown in what they were supposed to provide at the scene, which is a translator. And the other thing I want to talk about related to the AAPI shootings is the fact that the victims were degraded, and there was messaging around the perpetrator having a bad day, and the attempts to humanize him versus humanize the victims and their families, and how long it took for us to even understand who some of those victims were. And that also speaks to the isolation in which some of these women lived, that it took multiple days to even identify who they were. And for one of the women, the only family that she had were her two sons. The only family she had in America were her 2 young sons, waiting for their mother to get home from work. And he found out that his mom died from one of the victim's daughters. And so that isolation we don't talk enough about, because we know that we have the messaging of the model minority, the success of Asian Americans in this country, but we do not talk about the invisibility, the isolation, working class Asian people in this country and their struggles. And so some of those things did come to light with that. And then also, it was just the violence of how it happened and the fear that it instilled in the rest of the community. And I do think that it's a really important time for us to come together with other Americans in this specific time period where we're seeing a rise in hate crimes against our community, and do better community building amongst people. Because one of the things that happened immediately is that my Black Legislative Caucus said, we have your back, we know how you feel, we know your pain, and we are here for you, and have stood with me every single second of the way. And we see that familiar framing too of when a Black American dies because of police brutality, there's often times attempts to dehumanize the victim and humanize the perpetrator. So I hope that we, as a community, take this moment in time and really think about solidarity building, because we are stronger when we stand together. And when we are the recipients of hate, I believe it's our duty to make sure that's not directed at any other community as well. So I'll leave you with just 3 policy things that we introduced after the AAPI shootings happened. One is a statewide 911 mandatory language translation. So that exists in some counties already. In Atlanta and Cherokee, they both have it. So if you are not an English speaker, you'll call in and report something. They connect you to a third-party person who helps translate all of those things in language. Not every county in Georgia has it, but we want to see every county in Georgia have it. The second thing is cultural competency training, because we saw a breakdown in that cultural competency. Currently, the way that the training takes place in the state of Georgia is that members of law enforcement are not required to take cultural competency training. It's an elective. So we would like to see that be a requirement. And then the third thing is a 5-day mandatory waiting period for the purchase of a firearm, because the suspect in custody purchased that firearm the very same day that he went and shot 8 people, and as a result, 6 Asian women are dead. But we also see that same gun violence transpire across our nation. And so those are the 3 things that we did. We actually are making some pretty good progress. Our AAPI delegation has a meeting with Congresswoman Lucy McBath on Tuesday night to talk about gun safety and how our community can be more proactive in talking about how guns impact all of us.
Thank you for everything you've done. You're so powerful. We have
thank you,
Virginia Representative Kathy Chun in line, and she needs to speak too.
Great, I love Kathy. Thank you.
I would love to have a special session with you, maybe for 2 hours, and then we can support you much better.
Definitely.
Thank you, y'all.
Thank you for coming here today. And another super powerful Vietnamese woman is Virginia State Delegate chị Kathy Chun. She has devoted many years to working in the public sector, has passed plenty of bills, graduated from Duke University, and earned her Master of Social Work from the University of Michigan. Delegate Kathy Tran, you have the floor.
Hello, how are you? I am sorry, I just finished an event with my first in-person event in over a year with some constituents, and so I'm heading back home, but I'm so glad to be joining you today. I am Kathy Chun, and I represent the 42nd District in the Virginia House of Delegates, located in Fairfax County, southeast southern Fairfax County in Northern Virginia. So if you live in Northern Virginia or are familiar with our geography, I think there are actually a very significant community of Vietnamese Americans who live in and around my area here in Northern Virginia. And I am just so thrilled that Coachini reached out and invited me to join you today, I think, to talk about our efforts to protect access to healthcare and why that is so important. I think this pandemic has just brought to light even more some of the inequities in our healthcare system, where people are choosing every day between going to see a doctor, buying medication that they need, and going to work, right? And or sometimes, in many instances, not accessing the healthcare that in the medical treatments that's critical to save their lives because it's so expensive. What we've done in Virginia has been really just made so much progress on this issue. In 2018, we expanded Medicaid to, and at that time we thought about 400,000 Virginians were going to be able to be eligible with Medicaid expansion. But because of COVID, we've had more than 530,000 people get healthcare coverage because of Medicaid expansion. And under the Affordable Care Act, part of those costs were paid by the federal government and part of the costs are paid by the state. And so it was, in Virginia, we were able to work out a partnership with our hospitals where they covered the state costs. So it's been a win-win situation, and we've seen how life-changing that has been. And it's been an important healthcare policy for Vietnamese Americans here in Virginia to be able to access care. And so that has been an incredible aspects of making sure that everybody is covered. We've also begun programs to make sure that we expand access to reproductive health care. I think what's really important for women and for Vietnamese American and Asian American, Pacific Islander women is the ability for us to make our own healthcare decisions when it comes to our bodies. These are private decisions that are made with input from our doctors, but ultimately should reside with us. And politicians and in making decisions. And so here we have to having to get ultrasounds that are really invasive, having to, read literature that is not science-based. And I think what's really important about the fight for women's healthcare access is where states are leading the effort is incredibly important, because we know there are challenges to this right that are in the court systems and with the Supreme Court considering those cases. So it's really important that states like Virginia, like Georgia, and others step up to expand access to healthcare and expand access to reproductive healthcare for women and everybody who needs it. So that's been an incredibly important fight that we are and progress that we are making here in Virginia. We passed a significant bill in 2020, and then this year proactively taking away the prohibition for insurance plans to cover reproductive, to cover abortion care in Virginia. So that's no longer a significant prohibited in Virginia. This year, insurance plans can choose to offer that as a covered treatment. So those are two incredibly important wins for the community in terms of access to healthcare. The other thing I want to point out, though, is that we still have a long way to go in terms of language access. And when I joined, I heard Representative TUYòng N talk a little bit about translation services and such. And I think the same thing goes for healthcare, right? The same thing goes for accessing unemployment insurance and other state benefits. And so in Virginia, unfortunately, our Virginia Department of Health was using Google Translate during COVID. And so some of those translations were not correct. And they actually said for the Spanish translation that you don't have to get a vaccine, it's not important. So they quickly fixed that. But it's an example of how we have to do better in terms of language access and competency, culturally competent services. So my bill to assess a policy for language access for all of Virginia state government is going past. And so we have a consultation process in place right now to gather input in terms of what the language access policy should be for state services in Virginia. So I'm really excited about this step we're taking, and I look forward to those recommendations so that we could see, what should be the best policy by agency. Because, like, for example, outside of healthcare, for a quick second, on our unemployment insurance program, it was, press 1 for English, press 2 for Spanish, press 3 for other language, and then it hung up. And that's been a big fight to make sure that our unemployment insurance benefits are available to people in lots of other languages because it's been such a critical lifeline during the pandemic, as so many families are struggling economically. So I'm really glad that we're going to be developing this policy and figuring out how to make sure that Asian Americans and Vietnamese Americans can best access services in the languages that we need to access them and be able to be understood. So that's been really exciting as well.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely, some progress we're making in Virginia.
Yes, and I can tell that you have devoted so much of your time and your career into serving the public in the most meaningful way. So in the interest of time, I'd like to kind of move on into the Q&A session. Unfortunately, we won't be able to reach all of the questions that were posed. However, I do ask that elected officials, if you're still here, if you see a question addressed towards you in the Q&A box, you can go ahead and type out your answer directly to that question. But in under 1 minute, from Rep. Dean Tran, Delegate Kathy Tran, and Rep. Nguyen, where do you see yourself politically 5 to 10 years from now? And what is your vision for the Vietnamese community in electoral politics? Rep. Tran, I'll have you go for it first.
Well, I really appreciate that question. This year, I am actually up for re-election, so I'm focused on serving my community in the House of Delegates. I am only one of 2 Asian American state legislators who are running for re-election this year. So I'm really excited to do that, to be a voice for the community. I think that's been so important given everything we've seen, right, with the rise in hate and violence against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, how important representation is. But at the same time, 2 people is not enough. And we need to have so many more Asian American women and men running and speaking up and speaking out. And I think that we can run and win in districts where there are lots of Asian Americans, as well as districts where we are not the majority. We have the ability and the perspectives and the experience to represent many different types of communities and our own. And so I hope that everybody who thinks about running reaches out. I would be glad to talk to you about the process and help you get on your way.
Well, thank you so much for your very clear and articulate and hopeful answer. Rep. Dean Tran, obviously the same question. Where do you see yourself politically in 5 to 10 years? And what is your vision for our community's participation in electoral politics? You have the floor.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me as a panel to join everyone here. Some of my colleagues have mentioned that representation is extremely important in order for us to stop this Asian hate that is taking place across the country. In order for us to overcome a lot of the obstacles that especially the Vietnamese American community experiencing, we need to have that representation, not just on the local level, but on the state and federal level. So when I ran in Massachusetts, coming from Fitchburg, Massachusetts, I became the first minority elected in the history of the city. And then when I was elected in 2017, I became the first Vietnamese American to be elected to the Massachusetts legislature and the first Vietnamese American elected to the Massachusetts State Senate. And in my tenure, I was the only Asian-born American to serve in the Massachusetts State Senate, which is horrific to know because when I was elected, it was 2017. And then when I was reelected in 2018, and you would think that, my God, we're in the 21st century, this shouldn't happen. There should be more Asian American, especially more Vietnamese American to to be elected to the legislature, to the Congress, to represent our community. So, with that being said, I have been very proud of my record to represent us on the state level as well as on the local level. And then we'll see what happens in the future. We all know that there's going to be a pretty big election coming up in 2022. And I'm hoping not just myself, but to see more Vietnamese American step forward, represent us, get elected on the local, state, and federal level, because that's the only way we can make our voice heard.
Thank you so much for this very insightful answer. And I really, truly hope that we have a lot more last name Nguyen, Trans, and Youngs on the ballots. And up next, let us move on to the next portion of our programming, the youth panel composed of young and, not to toot my own horn, but promising leaders of the next generations of Vietnamese Americans. And this panel will be moderated by Cô Chi Nguyen. Cô, you have the floor.
Thank you, Cookie, for moderating a very interesting panel. Thank you, all elected officials. You gave us a lot of powerful hope and faith, and we wish that you would keep moving on forward and in the higher and blaze your path. I'm very happy today to have the youth panel following the elected officials. In this panel, we will have Long Nguyen, who participated early on in the founding of the Mid-Atlantic Union of Vietnamese Students Association, or MOSA. And he was the president of MOSA from 2008 to 2010. Next, we have Krista Chun, who is the current chair of MOSA alumni. And she also served as the former president of MOSA in 2016 and 2017. And last but not least, we have Cookie Dương, who just told us that she's the rising leader. And she expected to have the name Dương in the elected officials, right, Cookie? So each panelist will have their remarks for maybe 4 minutes. Then we'll have a Q&A session. Please send in your questions to the Q&A. Long, you have the floor now.
Hi, thank you. My name is Long Nguyen. I have a background in psychology and accounting, and I currently work for Marriott Hotels in events and meetings. Today, I want to speak about the ongoing generation gap among Vietnamese Americans. On one side, there is the younger generation that was either born here or immigrated young and raised here. And on the other side is the earlier generations, our parents and grandparents. I don't want to say older or elder generations because that'd be disrespectful. So I'll just say earlier. This generation gap shows itself in many ways, but one way that I've experienced is the disconnect between Vietnamese student associations, VSAs, and community organizations. Many colleges and universities have a VSA. It is an extracurricular club focused on Vietnamese people and Vietnamese culture. The students can socialize with each other, learn about traditions and history, perform culture shows and festivals, do community service, and raise money for charity. Meanwhile, the earlier generations participate in similar organizations. For example, many cities have a Cộng đồng Việt Nam. There are numerous other nonprofits as well that focus on different aspects of the Vietnamese population. These include Boat People SOS, National Congress of Vietnamese Americans, Association of Vietnamese Americans, and Voice of Vietnamese Americans. These two sides, the VSAs and community organizations, might have similar goals and similar activities. However, in the last 10 to 15 years, there has been a lack of cooperation and collaboration among them. They rarely work together on common projects or events. Neither side really knows what the other side does. Community organizations don't know how to appeal to VSAs and attract them to their programs. Meanwhile, VSAs don't know how to ask for help or who to ask for help in ways that will produce positive responses. I'll try to give some specific examples from my time with MOVSA, the Mid-Atlantic Union of Vietnamese Student Associations. This started as an alliance of 7 schools across DC, Maryland, and Virginia. They joined together in response to previous regional organizations such as UVSA Southern California, UVSA Northern California, and IVSA New England. From the start, MOVSA was planned and organized entirely by students with no input or involvement from the local community. In fall 2006, the student leaders from the original schools reached out to each other and arranged an in-person meeting in Richmond, Virginia. For the rest of the academic year, they continued having formal meetings to draft a constitution, and as well as informally meeting at each other's events and shows. In summer 2007, MOFSA ratified the Constitution and elected the first executive board. I served as the first treasurer, and my sister was the first president. Through the rest of 2007 and 2008, MOFSA continued to be run by students and recent graduates. We did a lot of foundational development on our own. We applied for an employee identification number, set up a PO box, opened business accounts, applied for 501c3 nonprofit status. All of this was self-taught. We did a lot of research on websites such as irs.gov and foundationcenter.org. In 2008, we tried a unique tactic. Instead of reaching out to the community organizations, we reached out to elected officials. I wrote letters to 95 state delegates and state senators from Maryland and Virginia. I specifically asked for general funding, cultural resources, and training materials. However, none of them wrote back. I then emailed 12 regional and national nonprofits. Some were focused on Vietnamese Americans and some were focused on the wider Asian American population, and only 2 wrote back. In spring 2008, MOFSA hosted a charity ball. Instead of the traditional 12-course sit-down dinner at a restaurant, it was a standing room reception with light appetizers. We invited local community members and organizations to attend, but none replied. By 2009, I had become president, and we realized that we had to change our outreach efforts and meet the community on their territory, so to speak. We hosted a fundraising dinner at Harvest Moon, which was a common location for local community events. We advertised the traditional format with the 10-course meal and live entertainment. And we also promoted the event in Vietnamese language newspapers. My mother was a freelance reporter, and she helped us by posting articles and ads. This gave MOFSA exposure through a form of media that the community was more familiar with. We again invited local community organizations, key community members, and parents, and this time we were a lot more successful. I believe we sold around 30 tables that year and raised additional donations. So this event seemed to open the door to more collaborations between VSAs and the community. For example, in 2010, we hosted a continental leadership conference for the Union of North American Vietnamese Student Associations. And in 2012, we started hosting our own regional leadership conferences. We invited numerous community leaders to run workshops at these conventions, and over the years, many agreed. However, there is still an overall lack of cooperation between VSAs and local community organizations. For example, some groups have tried to get young people to participate in anti-communist rallies and demonstrations. However, these are seen as a little too political for the students. Additionally, Người, Non Vietnam has tried to recruit students to walk in the Independence Day parade to spotlight the community, but the students don't feel the same enthusiasm or interest. In 2012, a new organization formed in our region, and one of their main events was a Viet festival. Half of the original executive board were MOFSA alumni with experience running large-scale events. However, their input was frequently ignored or dismissed. So those alumni eventually resigned. In 2015, there was a national summit for Vietnamese leaders. Throughout the planning, they intended to attract younger attendees to register. However, the student price was like $100, well beyond their budget. And even up to a couple weeks before the event, there was no program or schedule published so they knew what they were paying for. I believe I'm over my time now, but in summary, there is a disconnect between VSAs and community organizations and how they approach each other.
Thank you, Long, for all that issues that you brought up. Krista, you now have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Long. Thank you, Jeannie. Chào tất cả mọi người. Tên con là Krista Trần. Con là cựu chủ tịch Liên hội sinh viên Việt Nam miền Mid-Atlantic. Con làm việc ở phòng xét nghiệm ở nhà thương GW hospital. Hello, everyone. My name is Krista Tran. I am a former MOVSA president, current MOVSA alumni co-chair, and I currently work in the pathology laboratory at GW Hospital. I've actually been in the healthcare field for 10 years now, starting with volunteering and now as a working professional. And around the same time that I started in healthcare, I also started volunteering in the Vietnamese community. So these dual experiences have really shaped the way that I see healthcare and also shaped the way that I see community in very positive ways. So I hope to talk about my experiences in both realms, both passions of mine, actually. So first thing I want to talk about is the division and the differences in opinion of our cộng đồng in our Vietnamese community. It's pretty obvious that we've had a lot of challenging times in the past 4 years, possibly longer than that, in that, you know, there's a lot of political issues that we don't agree on, and there is a conservative movement and there's a more liberal progressive movement that is attached to different generations. And so we definitely need to address these disagreements and acknowledge them. We need to listen to each other and not have meaningful conversations, not just fight so that one side can be right and one side can be wrong. Going back to my experience as a healthcare professional, I see our community as a sick patient, and I see our community leaders as the healthcare system that treats the patient. And so in the healthcare system, we don't fight each other about who's right or who's wrong. We collaborate to make sure that we are treating the patient and doing what's best for their survival and for their life. And so similarly in our community, I believe that we need to discuss with each other and share ideas so that we can collaborate to make our community, to help our community heal and sustain itself for future generations. And so in conclusion, you know, having differences isn't always a bad thing. Having differences can lead to problem solving, lead to new ideas, lead to new initiatives. And I hope that we can reframe our thinking so that so that it's an us versus the issue versus us versus them. And secondly, real quick, I would like to talk about another issue in our community that goes along with what Lom said, in that we have lack of resources as a generation. As a hardcore millennial, someone who's getting married soon, thinking about buying a house and starting a family, I feel like there's not as many tools for success that we have that older Gen Xers and baby boomer generations have had. We have, you know, less financial security. We have less sustainable energy. We have less healthcare and wellness tools. And so how can we share these resources so that it's not just given to whoever talks the most or whoever goes to the most meetings? Because the people who aren't speaking, the people who aren't at the table are the ones who need those resources the most. And so, I mean, it's not something that could be solved overnight. It just requires a lot more collaboration, a lot more listening, and just thinking of our community as a patient that we can treat as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. All those are very good points that you brought up. Next is Cookie Dương. Cookie, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Krista and Long. I really loved your talking points, and I found so much that I learned from what you brought up. So I don't know how I can follow up, but I will try my best. My name is Cookie. I'm the founder of Người, Việt, the Interpreter. It is a website, a news aggregator that translates reputable news from international news outlets into Vietnamese to help lower the language barrier, bring more credible information to the Vietnamese community, and build a dialogue between younger and older generations. And it's called the-interpreter.org if you guys want to check it out. You know, when I first started out, it was just kind of like an on the whim decision, right? But ever since then, so many people have joined the team, over 30 translated editorial editors in the team. We have received recognition from international outlets such as BBC English, BBC Vietnamese, BuzzFeed News, NBC Asian Americans, and we cannot be any more grateful for this opportunity to do our job. So how did the interpreter come about? So it all started at the height of America's summer of protest, Black Lives Matter movement. You know, me and my dad, we have such a special relationship where we could talk about anything politically related without us, you know, disrespecting each other. However, you know, conversations didn't go so well when it came to Black Lives Matter because of the language barrier, because of the way that, you know, a lot of our parents weren't exposed to US politics or its history. And so I thought to myself, if I can't convince my dad, maybe I can convince somebody else's dad. And so that's how Người Thông Việt was born. It carries with it young Vietnamese Americans' desire to look toward their elders and to uplift all of our community collectively. It is staffed fully by bilingual young volunteers whose age ranges from high schoolers, you know, 18-year-old to people in their late 20s. And our motto, of course, is translating knowledge and empowering the community, because there's a very clear link between accurate information and political empowerment, especially in the recent years. Our vision statement is on the right here: an informed, connected, and engaged Vietnamese diaspora that seeks information and makes decisions grounded in the truth. With the theme of today's meeting, right, which is looking backward and moving forward, I think we definitely need to put an emphasis on the moving forward aspect of our community, with so much trauma, but so much hope for the future. We as a people were not exposed to aspects of civic participation that I think are essential to building a functional and healthy democracy. You know, practices like fine-tuning and selecting what news to read. We see a lot of our parents get news from like people like Trong Nhật Phong or Facebook newsfeed that really have no way to fact check. Misinformation then breeds profits and influence for the spreader, not the accurate news, but profit for those who are luring our elders in. But at the same time, misinformation also breeds fear, paranoia, and eventually extremist politics within those who subscribe to it. And we all know that war trauma is fertile breeding ground for this sort of very dangerous rhetoric, and the way that we absorb news in our community. So that's why I believe that in order to bridge the generational divide, and bringing everybody forward together, we need to be able to build common political ground based on objective reality and truth. At the same time, I also wholeheartedly believe that political empowerment and representation, you know, such things that have been emphasized so much with the previous panel, requires a critical understanding of United States history, both the good and the bad, because again, we love our country, but we have to be able to criticize it when it needs to be corrected. It comes with plentiful access to educational materials and updates on the United States political process across the board, both left and right. And that is why I believe that Người Thông Việt comes at a right time when the younger generation is ready to look backward and look forward. And we hope to be a conduit for the diaspora on relevant issues in the world, both here and in the United States. So thank you so much for having me, Krista and Long, in this very, very important conference.
Thank you, Cookie. Thank you, Krista and Long. We are now open for discussion. Please send in your questions to the Q&A section. I will raise the first question to all three panelists. What is the one thing that you wish the adult in our community would do now at this time? Would Krista like to start first?
Yes, I'll start. The question is, what do you wish the older generation would listen to and take action on? One important issue I think that would affect multiple future generations, not just the millennials and the Gen Zers, is environmentalism and sustainability. You know, we have electric cars for a reason, right? We don't want to burn the fossil fuels to the ground before the Gen Zers get to drive. And so I think it definitely starts at the home. You know, even though we as Vietnamese and Asian Americans, we like to be frugal and save things and reuse things. Like, it's not enough just to reuse it. To be frugal is we have to reuse things to be more sustainable and not create more waste, not create more trash, and take away resources from the environment. Another thing that I think is important is also to recycle and to open more jobs in the energy sector, and to make sure that more people in our generations are going into that kind of field where we're not creating more things for the world. We're reusing things and we're making use of what we already have.
Thank you, Krista. Just one thing, okay? Long, what is the one most important thing that you want the adult to do at this point?
Direct communication. I think we need to sit face to face and say, what do we want and why do we want it?
Wonderful. That's perfect. And Cookie, that leads right into your field with the người thông dịch.
Yes, 100%. I do think that we are doing our best to reach back towards the older generations, or I guess the generation that comes before us. But, you know, I think there's a lot of like TRspodngữ, right, in Vietnamese that really emphasizes respect and not talking back towards the elder. And the attitude that người lớn has on những người trẻ like us definitely can take some work. You know, câu tục ngữ like con cá không ăn nói cá ương, con cãi cha mẹ trăm đường con hư. You know, sometimes it is true. It is true. Dad, if you're watching, I don't disagree with you. But there are times when people's input, you know, young people's input are very valuable. And I think that's what we need to work on.
Thank you so much. I must say that you are very, very smart, and you gave out a lot of good insight and solutions. So we look forward to having you right there, leading us, both the young and the old, moving forward, Cookie, in your người thông dịch. I would suggest that in the interpreter to maybe also translate the Vietnamese, the older generation's ideas that you think is right into English, so that can help us to communicate directly the way that Long's suggesting, and the way that Krista is saying that we need to treat the patients as a whole completely. Thank you so much. So we now have just listened to the young generation. It is time now to commemorate the last 46 years with lots of struggles, strong will, sacrifices, and love that the first generation of Vietnamese Americans went through, so the younger generation can be where they are today. In this panel, we have Attorney Stephen Deal, Chair of the Vietnamese American Community in Houston, Texas, Mr. Bảo Kỳ Vũ, Chair of the Bonanza Goldfield Corp, and was the 2016 Georgia Republican elector, Mr. Thomas Công, founder and CEO of the Congressional Technology Group, Mr. Sidney Trần, who is the cybersecurity management consultant, Mr. Vinh Nguyen, founder and president of the Westgate Realty Group, Mr. THgsmåI don't see if he's here yet, Dr. Nguyễn Quỳnh Tài, who's the chairman of the Standing Committee of the Free Vietnamese Network. I have uploaded all of their bios into the Facebook page of Voice of Vietnamese Americans. In the interest of time, we skip that bio for now. And I would like to invite Attorney Stephen Deal as chair of very large community in Texas, in Houston, and you probably can share with us all the complicated issues that our community is experiencing right now. Attorney Stephen Deal, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Jean Nguyen. I hope everybody can hear me. My presentation more likely going to focus on my own generation and the generation before me. And I am very happy and thank you for the younger generations like B. Nguyen, Kathy Trump, Kayao, Cookie, Long, and Krista. And the reason what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch gear and I'm going to speak strictly in Vietnamese because my audience that I want to convey my messages today is to my generation and the one before me. And I think all of you probably hear and understand Vietnamese too. Kính thưa quý vị, chị Ngọc Giao, bác sĩ Tài, anh Tùng, anh Bảo Kỳ và tất cả mọi người. Cái đề tài mà hôm nay cá nhân tôi muốn nói đó là cái đề tài về cái gì là cái giá trị chính trị và quyền lợi của tập thể cộng đồng người Việt trên nước Mỹ này. Hồi nãy giờ quý vị nghe tất cả những người trẻ đã trình bày, tất cả những cái gì họ trình bày là đi vào cái trọng tâm, đó là làm thế nào để mà phát triển, phát huy, bảo vệ và bảo tồn quyền lợi của tập thể cộng đồng người Việt tại những cái khu vực của họ ra ứng cử. Những cái khu vực của họ ra và họ lãnh đạo thì có một số là những người Việt và những người trẻ sinh viên ra. Tất cả những gì họ làm đều là vì cái quyền lợi của tập thể cộng đồng người Việt của chúng ta. Nào, thì chúng ta biết tất cả người Việt chúng ta nếu mà nói về cái giá trị cá nhân và đạo đức thì chúng ta đã có cả trăm cả ngàn năm nhân nghĩa lệ trí tính và một cái đặc tính tốt của tập thể cộng đồng người Việt hay là của người Việt nói chung đó là cần cù siêng năng làm việc. Tất cả những cái này là những cái đặc tính tốt của cá nhân về đạo đức của con người. Cái mà ngày hôm nay cá nhân tôi muốn đề cập tới đó là cái gì là cái giá trị và cái quyền lợi của chính trị trong cái tập thể cộng đồng người Việt của chúng ta. Nãy giờ quý vị nghe những người trẻ họ nói về cái quyền lợi thì ngày hôm nay tôi sẽ đào sâu vào cái vấn đề là cái giá trị chính trị của chúng ta là cái gì. Và một cái để tôi mở đầu cái đó thì có vẻ hơi tranh cãi, nhưng mà tất cả những gì chúng ta làm ngày hôm nay cũng sẽ có những người tranh cãi. Thì cái điểm đầu tiên tôi muốn đưa ra cho tất cả quý vị thấy đó là cái lá cờ vàng. Trong 46 năm vừa qua, cái lá cờ vàng đã được vinh danh và nó ra trên 20 tiểu bang và cả trong các thành phố mà có người Việt của chúng ta dưới một cái danh nghĩa nó kêu là cái Heritage and Freedom Flag. Dịch ra tiếng Việt nó là cái lá cờ tự do và di sản. Thì cái lá cờ Việt Nam của chúng ta là cái lá cờ mà chúng ta nói là cái di sản, mà chúng ta lấy cái lá cờ Việt Nam là một cái biểu tượng của một cái dân chủ và tự do. Thì bây giờ nếu mà cái đó là cái giá trị tự do và dân chủ thì chúng ta phải định nghĩa dân chủ và tự do là cái gì. Đó. Một cái vấn đề mà khi mà cái chuyện nó xảy ra trong cái năm 2020 trong cái cuộc bầu cử, nếu quý vị có xem trên cái YouTube này, quý vị có nghe hồi nãy giờ, quý vị thấy những cái người trẻ giống như Bi Nguyễn, giống như Kathy Trump, giống như Long, giống như Krista, giống như Cai Giao. Quý vị nhìn vào những người trẻ này, quý vị thấy họ có phải là Việt Cộng hay không? Quý vị có thấy họ là những người có cái cộng sản hay không? Quý họ có thấy là những cái người có phải là kẻ thù của tập thể đồng bào của chúng ta tại nước Mỹ này hay không? Hay là họ là những người trẻ rất là năng nổ đi ra ngoài tranh đấu cho tất cả những cái quyền lợi của tập thể người Việt của chúng ta? Tại sao chúng ta phải ngăn cách họ, tẩy chay họ theo cái chủ thuyết cancel culture? Thì bây giờ chúng ta phải ngồi lại với nhau và chúng ta phải định nghĩa và đưa ra cái giá trị chính trị của tập thể người Việt là cái gì. Nếu mà chúng ta thật sự tin vào cái định nghĩa là dân chủ thì chúng ta phải hỏi dân chủ là gì. Nếu mà dân chủ là tôn trọng những cái ý kiến và cái sự bất đồng ý kiến của thì cái câu trả lời tôi muốn hỏi ba của Cookie, chú có nghĩ là Cookie đi đường sai hay không? Một cái người trẻ thành có phải là con cá ương hay không? Và Long và Krista, B, Kathy có phải là những con cá ương mà cha mẹ không vui hay không? Nếu mà quý vị ngồi lại, tôi nghĩ là tất cả quý vị rất là hãnh diện con của quý vị đã thành công. Nó là người Việt ở hải ngoại này. Bây giờ đi ngược lại, cái giá trị chính trị của tập thể cộng đồng người Việt là gì? Khi mà chúng ta đồng ý và chúng ta định nghĩa và chúng ta làm theo, bởi vì nhiều khi nói đó nó trở thành một cái cliché, những cái lời nói giống như cái câu chúng ta thường hay nói cộng đồng người Việt, nhưng mà không ai biết quý vị nói với một cái nhóm nhỏ mới vài người, nhưng mà quý vị lấy cái danh từ là cộng đồng để mà bao gồm tất cả mọi người, nhưng mà thật sự nó chỉ là một cái ý của vài người thôi. Thành ra cái chữ cộng đồng nó cũng bị lạm dụng. Một cái chữ thứ nhì mà trong 46 năm chúng ta nói hoài, tất cả những người sinh hoạt trong tập thể cộng đồng, chúng ta nói tập thể cộng đồng cần phải đoàn kết. Cái cụm từ đoàn kết, khi mà quý vị nói cái chữ cụm từ đó, quý vị dùng nó là một cái danh từ, a noun. Nhưng mà đối với tôi cái chữ đoàn kết nó là động từ, is a verb. Có nghĩa là gì? Quý vị cần phải hành động để mà chứng minh là cái sự đoàn kết, chứ không thể nào cứ nói đoàn kết mà cái hành động của chúng ta nó đi ngược lại cái vấn đề đoàn kết. Khi mà quý vị tẩy chay một người vì một cái sự bất đồng ý kiến thì quý vị có nghĩ là quý vị đoàn kết hay là quý vị chia rẽ? Và khi mà chúng ta nói chúng ta bảo vệ và tranh đấu cho nhân quyền và cho dân chủ và tự do trong nước Việt Nam, đó là một cái ước nguyện rất là cao cả mà luôn cả những cái thế hệ trẻ của chúng ta hiện nay cũng đang ao ước và đang tiến hành cái vấn đề đó, tiếp nối cái con đường tranh đấu đó. Nhưng mà trước khi mà chúng ta tranh đấu cho dân chủ và nhân quyền Việt Nam, cái điểm đầu tiên là chúng ta cần phải tranh đấu cho dân chủ và nhân quyền trong cái tập thể cộng đồng người Việt của chúng ta ở hải ngoại này. Và cái tôi có thể nói dài nhưng mà bây giờ hết giờ. Và cảm ơn chị Giao Nguyễn và cảm ơn tất cả mọi người.
Thank you, Stephen. Cảm ơn luật sư Stephen Deal. Những cái điều anh nói ra rất là quan trọng và bổ ích. Hy vọng là chúng ta sẽ có dịp mời luật sư Stephen Deal trở lại và nói chuyện với chúng ta trong 1 giờ đồng hồ tất cả những điều quan trọng này. Vì có người, we have a panelist, Mr. TRődC, who has to go in a few minutes. I'm going to invite him to speak next. Mr. TRődC is the software engineer, and he has a lot of thinking about the issues we have currently in the community. Anh Thọ, would you please take the floor?
Anh Thọ không có ở đây chị không?
He used the Facebook link. He said he's unable to access us, but don't know if he texts me asking to give him a few minutes. Well, until anh Thọ is ready, I'm going to invite Mr. Bảo Kỳ Vũ. I'm going to invite Mr. Bảo Kỳ Vũ, who can help us to understand better what Attorney Stephen Deal just talked about. Mr. Bảo Kỳ Vũ is from Georgia, and he has a long time being in the Republican Party. He was the presidential elector for the Republican Party in 2016. And he recently is facing a lot of challenges with what Attorney Stephen Deal has just brought up. Mr. Bảo Kỳ Vũ, would you please take the floor?
Thank you, chị Ngọc Giao. Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm honored to be here with you all today. The biggest challenge I face today is actually being considered part of the older generation. I was hoping to be grouped in with thế hệ trẻ mới đây. But I want to thank everyone, and it's been fascinating to listen to especially the voices of the rising generation. I've had the pleasure of discussing this with anh Stephen qua một số cái programs before today, and it's great to actually see this in action as you're putting this program together. You'll forgive me, I was fighting some health issues with respiratory issues, and so my voice may not be that clear today. First thing I'd like to start by saying that I cannot believe that it's been 46 years since we lost our country of South Vietnam. And for many of us whose families left either plane, as mine did before the fall of Saigon, to those who had to flee by boat or through the jungles, I know we all have our very traumatic stories to share. But I believe that we today are at times still fighting our own past. And that's why I think what the words of anh Stephen Deal has mentioned is always resonates with me, because if we can get past that, then I believe that we can be a more powerful collective voice for the community. So today I wanted to share with you a couple of issues that I faced over the course of the last, really, 10 years as a member of the Board of Elections in DeKalb County, where you heard State Representative Binh Nguyen from. In Atlanta, Georgia, we have seen an enormous turnout of Asian American voters over the last 4 years. And whether you're Republican or a Democrat, to be proud of the fact that fellow Vietnamese Americans are taking their steps to participate in this American democracy. Today, I wanted to talk about the issue of elections integrity, because I think through a number of states, especially since the November elections results, many people have been accused of fraud when there was no widespread fraud. And I want to explain to our community the complexities of the electoral process in this country, because the fact that there is a federal layer of elections legislation down to the state level and down to the county level, it should reinforce the fact that the election systems in this country rarely have widespread intentional fraud that takes place. And I want to debunk any myth that there's actually widespread fraud that took place in November 2020 or in January of 2021. I myself have been involved in the Board of Elections for many years as a Republican appointee. And in fact, in the household, we have my wife, who actually was Assistant Director of Elections under a gentleman by the name of Brian Kemp when he was Secretary of State. And so we have seen the elections process taking place. We see the systems that are put in place, the people that are put in place, the technology that's put in place in order to ensure access, security, and integrity of the election system, right? The one thing that I want to encourage the Vietnamese American communities and obviously my fellow citizens to do is to continue to be engaged. In 2020, I've never seen before in my lifetime, the energy and the participation, whether you're from a candidate such as the Binh Nguyens and the Cham Nguyens of the world, to the community advocates. Many Vietnamese Americans got involved at the local levels through community-based organizations to volunteer their time to help translate information packets, and many for the first time voted as an American citizen. So that is the step we have to take in order to strengthen our community. And I want to end on this note because as I mentioned, my family left 46 years ago, and we're extremely fortunate to have left before the fall of Saigon. But while we may come from different backgrounds, we all share a common, and the tone and the discourse that I get to experience here today, along with all of you, is what I want all of us to carry forward in our communities going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and Bảo Kỳ Vũ. We do hope to have another session with you, maybe an hour, to extend all the facts that you brought up. Next is anh Thọ still here. Are you able to join us, anh Thọ?
Yeah, chị có nghe được mình không chị?
Dạ, nghe được. We hear you well.
Okay.
Anh Thọ, please take the floor.
Okay. Xin phép được chào tất cả các anh chị. Tôi cũng cần gấp phải đi, ra xin phép được nói ngắn gọn thôi. Một trong những cái điều mà tôi rất là mong mỏi mà nhìn thấy cái cộng đồng chúng ta mà cần phải làm tốt hơn, đó là cái ý thức chính trị đúng đắn. Cái ý thức chính trị đúng đắn là gì? Có nghĩa là chúng ta phải ý thức được cái quyền lợi của cái cộng đồng của chúng ta, chứ không phải là đặt cái quyền lợi của cộng đồng, của tập thể, của người Việt của người Việt mình ở đây lên trên, chứ đừng có đặt cái tự ái cá nhân mình, hay là đặt những cái hiềm khích nhỏ nhặt giữa chúng ta với nhau. Mà chúng ta cần phải học hỏi những cái kinh nghiệm mà những cái sát dân đi trước họ đã vạch ra con đường đi cho chúng ta. Một trong những cái điều mà chúng ta làm rất yếu đó là cái ý thức cái quyền lợi chính trị. Cái quyền lợi chính trị nó đi đôi với lại quyền lợi kinh tế. Người Việt mình là ít khi nào chịu đi bầu, mà đến khi đi bầu thì đi bầu rất là mù quáng, dồn phiếu cho không cái lá phiếu của mình, chứ không có cái lá phiếu của chúng ta, nó không có cái lưỡi câu để mà nó mang lại cái quyền lợi cho thực tiễn cho cái cộng đồng mình. Cái đó thành ra là khi mà chúng ta mà ở nước Mỹ này, mình nhìn thấy có những cái rất là vô lý, là cộng đồng chúng ta, cái chuyện mà mọi người đập đổ nhau, mà nó nói mà chửi bới nhau, mà đến thậm tệ, mà đến nghĩa là những cái dùng những ngôn từ và hành động nó xin lỗi, nó không có xứng đáng, và nó không có phản ánh cái giá trị chân thật của người Việt mình. Dân tộc ta đừng có nói mà văn hóa 5.000 năm, cái đó là chúng ta cái đó là cái lịch sử chúng ta có 5.000 năm, văn hóa chúng ta trên 10.000 năm. Dân tộc chúng ta đối xử với nhau, chúng ta nhân nghĩa là đặt nhân nghĩa làm đầu. Cái tình thương giữa người và người là quan trọng nhất. Ngay sau lưng đó là cái niềm tin vào cái công lý. Và đến cái thứ ba, nó nói mà anh Stephen Deal có nhắc nhở, đó là cái sự tôn trọng lẫn nhau. Thành ra là cái con đường mà chúng ta ở đây á, chúng ta muốn mà chúng ta thành công, một cái vấn nạn lớn nhất của chúng ta, lấy dụ như tôi nói như người cộng đồng người Do Thái, tại sao họ ảnh hưởng được chính trị của Mỹ được rất là nhiều mà chúng ta làm không được? Người Do Thái, chính quyền Do Thái và người Mỹ có cái quyền lợi của họ tương đồng, còn chúng ta đang bị cái tình trạng rất là khổ sở là cái quyền lợi của người Việt Mỹ, người Mỹ gốc Việt ở đây và đồng bào của chúng ta ở quốc nội, và cái chính quyền và cái quyền lợi của chính quyền cộng sản nó không có tương đồng. Thành ra bởi vì cái con đường mà chúng ta đi tới nó gian nan lắm. Nhưng mà bây giờ mình nói cái quyền lợi kinh tế thực tế ở nước Mỹ này đi, thì nói một điều chúng ta cần làm là khuyến khích đồng bào chúng ta thành lập những cái hiệp hội, những cái ngành nghề mà chúng ta gần như là chúng ta thấy như ngành nail, ngành tóc, ngành làm nail, hay là rất nhiều ngành nghề khác, ngành nhà hàng chẳng hạn vậy. Chúng ta rất là nhiều mà chúng ta tiếng nói chúng ta không có, là tại vì người Việt mình ù lì, cứ mạnh ai nấy làm, không có chịu đoàn kết với nhau, không có chịu hợp lại với nhau để mà tạo thành một cái khối sức mạnh. mà đến thành ra là mình cần phải khuyến khích đồng bào mình nó nói tiến đến cái việc thành lập những cái hiệp hội đó để chi nói khi mà chúng ta bỏ phiếu cho ai là nó có cái điều kiện ở trong đó, chứ chúng ta không có cho không cái lá phiếu. Chúng ta đừng có nói là tôi bỏ phiếu người đó tại vì người đó theo đảng Cộng Hòa. Nó không cái người đó hay là người đó theo đảng Dân Chủ. Những người đại biểu đó phải có những cái đường hướng nó thích hợp và nó có lợi cho cái đồng đạo, cho những cái hội đoàn của chúng ta, cho cái cộng đồng Việt Nam chúng ta nói chung, thì chúng ta mới ủng hộ. Cái lá phiếu của chúng ta nó phải có lưỡi câu ở trong đó. Thì đi trên đường dài hơn nữa thì chúng ta mới có thể thành lập được Political Action Committee, mới ảnh hưởng được cái chính trị của nước Mỹ. Chính trị và kinh tế nó có đi đôi được với nhau thì chúng ta mới có tạo được cái sức mạnh. Tại sao cộng đồng người Do Thái họ mạnh? Là tại vì họ không có mù quá, họ đảng bên nào họ cũng ủng hộ hết trơn á, họ cũng mua chuộc được hết trơn á. Cái đồng tiền, những cái chính sách mà được ở trên mà nó được ban bố ra là nó đều mang lợi, nó mang lại cái lợi tức cho cái cộng đồng người Do Thái nó rất là thực tiễn. Đó là cái khôn của họ và đó là cái khôn chúng ta cần phải học. Đó là cái điều mà chúng ta cần phải làm. Đó là những cái chuyện chúng ta làm được hết. Cái mà chúng ta cái điều mà chúng ta đừng bao giờ cũng như là mình nói được thì mình phải làm được. Là cái điều đầu tiên là nó nói chúng ta sống đúng với lại cái tinh thần mà cha ông của mình dạy mình. Lúc nào cũng lấy nhân nghĩa làm đầu, lúc nào cũng lấy cái sự tôn trọng lẫn nhau để mà làm việc với nhau. Thì có như thế chúng ta mới đi được. Và tôi có một điều này xin phép được, tôi cũng cần phải đi rồi. Tôi xin phép nhắn được là các em nói các em đừng có nghĩ là cá không ăn muối cá ương. Cái đó những câu đó nó đúng, mà mình cũng có nói mà nó nói sống sau nó đè sống trước. Đừng có nói cái thế hệ sau. Các em nhìn thấy những điều và các em có khả năng hơn là thế hệ của tôi. Là bởi vì các em sinh ra và lớn lên ở cái điều kiện của nước Mỹ này. Các em nó you were far more well prepared and you had a hell of a longer time, with this culture, and you know what's going on, you know how to deal with it. Thành ra là nó cái đó đừng có bao giờ mà nghĩ là nó nói mà. Thành ra là nó chính là những người ở thế hệ của mình, những người như tôi đi trước, phải đối xử với các em là phải có cái sự tôn trọng và kính trọng tối thiểu, chứ còn không có nói chuyện mà nói khơi là tụi bay trẻ tao, tụi phải nghe lời tao. Cái chuyện đó cái suy nghĩ đó nó lỗi thời rồi. Cái ở nước Mỹ này là nó nói cái chuyện mà sống sau đè sống trước là cái chuyện nó xảy ra hàng ngày hàng giờ. Và tôi cũng xin phép được gửi đến các em như là cô Cúc Kỳ Dương hay là cô Trâm Nguyễn, cô Biên Nguyễn, cái lời nó nói những việc làm của các cô và những cái suy nghĩ của các cô. Tôi nói thật, nói hồi nãy tôi ngồi mà tôi muốn khóc là vì tôi vô cùng xúc động. Là các em nói là các cô là xứng đáng là là thế hệ mai sau, là những cái người đại biểu cho người Việt mình ở đây. Và tôi xin gửi đến các cô cũng là lời chào chân thành. You have my respect. Don't keep up the good work. Và cũng tôi đến đây có lẽ cũng đã phải nhiều, cũng phải gấp phải đi liền bây giờ. Thành ra là nói rất cảm ơn các chị Giao đã tổ chức một cái conference rất là thành công. Và nó ngồi nghe mà tôi xúc động không biết bao nhiêu lần. Và cũng nó xin cảm ơn tất cả các anh chị. Nó xin tạm biệt các anh chị ha.
Cảm ơn anh Thọ đã nói lên hộ những người lớn tuổi là chúng tôi rất quý mến các em. Và trên thực tế là cái event này rất là nhiều những người trẻ đã xuống vào mà làm, chứ nếu không thì chúng ta cũng không có được như vậy. Nhưng anh Thọ đương nói đến chuyện xây dựng nội lực về kinh tế và có các hiệp hội thương mại họp lại để mà tạo cái nội lực và sức mạnh về cái lá phiếu. Thì Ngọc Giao xin được mời anh Vinh Nguyễn. I would like to invite Mr. Vinh to continue the trend of thought that Mr. Thọ Võ presented, that we need to have Vietnam champs, associations of trade to support the development of our community. And Vinh Nguyễn, would you take the floor?
Yeah, cảm ơn chị Giao. Thank you. I was asked to brief you on the economic condition of our Vietnamese American community. And due to the time limit, I don't want to go over statistics or I'll mention our strengths, but to point out two deficiencies that we as a community, excuse me, in order to move forward, we can alleviate or implement steps to alleviate. So the first problem or deficiency, number one, is related to capacity building. In particular, access to capital. All of us came here as refugees. We left Vietnam, uprooted overnight. So we left all the possession in Vietnam, came here empty hand, empty pocket. So we all started from zero. And so we are at the, or we were at a disadvantage point compared with other minority groups, such as the Chinese community or the Korean community. Their business have the initial capital a lot higher than ours. And so their business tend to be a lot larger scale. Aside from starting their business with higher capital investment, they can even access their home country if the need arises for more capital. Such is not the case for our. And so access to capital, our own business people will have to go to commercial lenders and the Small Business Administration. But due to language barriers and our cultural cash-only business model deter us from getting the necessary capital. So we kind of sideline and do not enjoy or get the benefit that give us the strength to move forward or to move higher in the echelon. We also have a lot of Vietnamese. The other problem is the lack of engagement of successful entrepreneurs and executives in the community. And we all know companies, Vietnamese American companies or entrepreneurs. And we also have a lot of Vietnamese American in leadership position, executive position at major US companies or world companies. Bank of America, TikTok, Uber, just to name a few. But somehow they got disconnected from the community. There is no network to connect them. And frankly, there is not much activity that they can participate in meaningful way or productive way currently. The goal here is to connect with these business entrepreneurs, executives, scientists, and to provide opportunities so that they can re-engage and to pay forward or to reinvest in our community. So with the limited time available for me, I just give you some examples, the things that we can do. Everybody knows Vietnamese American dominate the nail industry. There are 42,000 nail salons across the country. If somehow we can set up an investment fund. Give you an example. What happens if each nail salon invests $100 a month? In a month, we have $4.2 million. In a year, we have $50 million, 50.4 to be exact, $1 billion. Imagine what can we do with that huge investment. And that's only 1 year. What about 5 years? $250 million. See how powerful that is? So if you refer back to a comment that politics and economics go together, if the Vietnamese community is that strong, or provide access to capital, even from just one industry, the nail salon industry, that they can access money to expand. If there's a short, a cash flow problem, they can access, or they can get the money to expand. So that is very powerful. And when they use the money from their own community, they tend to come back and reinvest in the community. So that's one example of what we can do. The other is, what if we have a combination of a mentoring education program to provide a source of creativity, inspiration for our young people, young entrepreneurs or scientists, and make it a platform, a launchpad for new business ventures? What if we have a short-term type of program for Vietnamese American community to promote new business opportunities? How about establish a CEO club for Vietnamese American executives, meet regularly to share ideas? Imagine the valuable information that we can extract from their experience, knowledge, ingenuity, and resources. And this is the place where we can send, or they can mentor. If we need something, we reach out to them, and they can reach back to the community. So these are just a few ideas. It is up to you and me to take concrete steps to turn these and other ideas into reality. So when do we start? It's up to you.
Thank you, and Vinh.
Thank you.
I'm going to invite Mr. Thomas Công, anh Tùng Công, to join in the conversation. He's a panelist. And Mr. Thomas Công, anh Tùng Xuân Tùng cũng là một người khởi nghiệp nhưng mà đã thành công lắm. Anh là founder and CEO of a very well-known technology company. Would anh Tùng please take the floor?
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Vinh, for bringing up the points. Totally support it from my end, and learning the ropes on my own. I absolutely align with the description that you have to, like for our people to start a business and try to grow the business. So if you need any help there, let me know. Going back to the the main topic of our webinar, the looking back and moving forward. I happen to be kind of a generation 1.5. So I'm in between the older generation who directly experienced the war and the escape from communism, and the younger generation that we have seen, Cookie and Krista and Long. I feel like I have a good understanding of why each generation, think the way they think, and I feel like a lot of it has to do with the kind of communication. Many immigration parents came to the U.S. and spent day and nights working 2 or 3 jobs, like we have heard, right? And they basically have no time to talk to their children. And then when the children go to school, learn English, become fluent in English, it start developing the kind of a gap. Like the kids cannot talk in English with the parents cannot communicate in Vietnamese. So I think if we can, as a community, if we can help bridge that gap by building up the kind of better understanding through some language education, learn how to Viet, learning to talk to your parents in Vietnamese, try to learn the history of Vietnam, why the older generation is so adamant about like anti-China. Just look at the history of Vietnam, you know why. And then why they are so like anti-communist, and you have to learn and appreciate the struggle that they came through, and then you can understand that why they think the way they think. So I think there has to be a kind of a embrace from both generations. The older one need to agree that hey, bây giờ con cái mình lớn rồi, the younger generation will do much better than what we did in the past. And then on the other side, the younger generation need also to learn the lesson and understand the struggle that their parents and grandparents have gone through. So I think this webinar is a first step in the right direction, and hopefully we can foster more kind of a discussion and communication, and hopefully we can together push our community forward as a significant community with a political clout in the U.S. politics, and at the same time we take care of our own people.
Thank you, anh Tùng. I would like to invite Sydney Trần Quốc Sĩ to join in the same train of thought. because I think TRspodC and Tùng probably at the same age and also in the technology age. Would see the floor.
Yeah. Thank you, chị Giao. So similar to anh Tùng and anh Bảo Kỳ, we used to be the young generation. No more. We are now 1.5, and soon it's going to be 1.8 or closer to 2. But you know, our family is a University of Maryland graduate. We are a TERP family. In fact, went through college, we were wondering what happened to VSAs after we left, because at the time we thought that there were not too many Vietnamese Americans. Not only are we surprised and very pleased with where we are now, the fact that the VSAs are not only operating as islands, they actually come together as MAFSA and other organization, which is great to see. Now, the generations that are my kids' generation, they certainly do not have any problem choosing their own paths and speaking their minds. But absolutely, I do see that there's undeniable gaps, not only in terms of information gaps between our generation and our kids' generation, but maybe even my parents' generation with my kids' generations, right? So I think there's absolutely gaps in information, but then there's also the emotional gaps, right? So if they do not see eyes to eyes on a political point of view, I have seen families being broken up, children stop talking to their parents, children stop talking to their grandparents, and I think that's a problem, and that's something that we need to work to solve. Not now and not here, but maybe this is the beginning of that conversation. So that's one area. The second areas that I see as a burning platforms, and that is related to the discrimination against Asian Americans, and we all have talked about that. So we do recognize that racism exists, and we see that the political culture within the last 4 years, the pandemic has worsened that atmosphere and worsened the problem of discrimination. But the first thing we need to understand and be able to agree upon is there's nothing that resemble the model minority meant that our older generations sometimes believed. Asian Americans, Vietnamese Americans are better minorities because we work harder, because we endure more, so on and so forth. I think that's the first thing that we need to topple, is that model minority mentality. And we need to stand up. We need to work with each other. We need to speak up. We need to link arms with other minority groups to fight against racism. And I think that there's going to be multiple opportunities for us to work together in the future. But I think this is a very good start to have that conversation. So let me stop, and thanks again to everyone for giving me the opportunity to convey the ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, Quốc Sĩ. We have a very important panelist here, Dr. Nguyễn Quyền Tài, and he's been working on this for a long time, and he's still pushing forward to the united and do everything better for the community as a whole. Dr. Nguyễn Quyền Tài, please take the floor. You may have to unmute yourself, Dr. Tai. Please unmute. Dr. Tai, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mrs. Ngọc Giao.
I would like to take the last minutes of this session to thank you all for sharing your thoughts with us. And I will be brief because this is something that probably you have as well. I'm still very concerned about the extreme political partisanship that has engulfed a large number of Vietnamese Americans in the last few years, in particular during the and after the last US presidential election. No more civil debates, but instead bickering and name-callings, diffusion of mis and disinformation, excessive demonstration of dissension. This unfortunate situation still simmers. Elections are over. In order to free ourselves from this sad state of affairs, I think we will have to recover our true vision of America, true conception of a freedom and democracy. Partisanship among elected officials, failure to represent the various interests of the diverse US population are the main factors that allow political scientists such as Francis Fukuyama of Stanford University to qualify our institution as a political decay. We should not let flawed politics guide our behavior. We should instead demand that our representatives serve the true interests of its diversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyễn Quỳnh Tài. At this point in time, we truly have a few minutes left if we want to have a discussions. If anybody has a questions, please send into the Q&A and raise your hands. Before we receive the questions, I'd like to say that many panelists have said that this is just the beginning. We do hope that we have many other discussions to follow to talk more in depth about all the points that you brought up. So all the panelists who want to expand on your points, please be ready and let me know and we'll set up the session with you. Anybody has any questions for any panelists here? If not, I'm going to raise a question to Mr. Vũ Bảo Kỳ. Please share with us how you think about the current situation by the Republican Party. You know, a majority of all the Vietnamese Americans, we tend to follow the Republican parties, and sometimes they could care less of what the party says, but they just vote for Republicans. Is there anything that you can bring up for us to make the choice? And also, since you are from Georgia, please discuss the current Georgia voting rights that impeding the votes of Vietnamese Americans and minorities, because we don't have money, we have the votes that make our voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. Well, first of all, I would like to say that what you all are experiencing when you read the news about the Republican Party is exactly what's happening, and is the fact that there are Republicans who still believe in the ideas of freedom, democracy, free trade, pro-business, pro-business, and there's another segment that isn't really Republican at all, not since the days when I've been involved as a Republican Party activist. There is a segment that has become anti-business, there's a segment that's become anti-science, and anti-progress. Có nghĩa là chống tiến bộ, chống khoa học và chống thương mại. This is a battle for not just the Republican Party. I think it's a battle for what America truly stands for, because we are going through a series of economic and health challenges in this country, and that also is taking place across the country and the world. And we are looking for solutions. But as I see from our discussion today, the Republican Party no longer enjoys the type of conversations and discourse that many of you are actually supporting. It has become a party of loud voices overtaking the reasonable and educated voices. So that I don't think it's going to end anytime soon, but it will continue to play out, especially in 2022, and obviously perhaps in 2024, when the former US president has threatened to run for another term. As for the state of Georgia, you heard previously from State Representative Nguyen. Georgia has moved from being a solidly Republican state as of really just 7 years ago, to now being a very close purple / swing state. That is because of two big reasons. One is the election of Donald Trump to be the 45th president of the United States energized many folks, including principal Republicans and independents. Secondly, the recent business growth into Georgia has brought along with it many families who previously called Texas home, previously called California home. They now have moved here because of the business climate, but with them, and especially because these new citizens tend to be the young professionals, they are better educated and they're better informed. And so they become much more engaged in the political process. From 2016 through 2018 through 2020, the state of Georgia saw an increase of about 1 million voters across the state. It's enormous when you think about that. Because why? Because for a state of 10.5 million, the voter participation rate has increased substantially between 2016 and 2020. The elections, quote unquote, legislations that have been passed this past session were worrisome to me. I was worried, not because it's an outright suppression of the vote, but I was worried because the legislation was brought forth based on the premise of the biggest lie of all, which is that somehow there was widespread fraud in the electoral process. That was the first reason why I was against it. Second reason was the fact that as a Republican who believes in the exchange of ideas and who believes strongly in free trade, being pro-science innovation, it was also the optics, ấn tượng, the perception that was extremely negative for the Republican Party. We are now telling people that we should change laws when it deals with elections every time we lose, which is not what we. And thirdly, I was concerned about it because it puts enormous stresses on the state as well as the counties to conduct reasonable elections given the budgetary constraints that we have. So again, it's three reasons I was against it. It was because of the reason for it being passed, which is that somehow there was widespread fraud. There wasn't. That's a fact. And it's been proven time and again that there wasn't widespread fraud. Recounts, court, as well as the people who propagated these lies in the first place, whether it's Rudy Giuliani or Sidney Powell, having in the court of law, their attorneys saying, you know what, no one reasonable should believe what we said, right? So I hope that that's a summary of what we've gone through in Georgia. And I hope that both sides can come back from the brink at bringing the state together. But this is a bigger story. It's about America and what kind of role we have to play in order to promote democracy in America. So thank you.
Thank you, and Bảo Kỳ. We all have heard Representative Nguyen, who helped to bring the voice of the peoples up. Now, in your case, you have been the core members of the Republican parties in Georgia. And with everything that you put forth, it sounds like a foundation of democracy in the United States, in America. But what is going on inside the party? I heard that the party had asked you to resign, censure you from everything that you bring forth. Is that correct?
Yes. First of all, I was actually amused that they were thinking of me on that particular day. I think that as all of us know, we have enormous challenges in this country right now, whether it's the pandemic, or the economic and mental effects from the pandemic. We have enormous national security challenges from Russia and China, competitive threats from China. And so the day that many counties passed the censure motions against, and I'm not the only one, some of the elected officials, including the governor, Brian Kemp, as well as Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and the Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan also received the censures from some of the county Republican activists. I personally think that for us here, you know, we know what it's like to flee an authoritarian country. We fought for democracy in our homeland for many years, and even like Stephen had mentioned before, it's ironic that we are now fighting for democracy here in this country. But I think that we all have a unique role and a unique perspective to fight for democracy in this country, because we can remind ordinary Americans that if we don't fight here for democracy, then there will be no other democracy for us to flee to in the future. So that's why I am always thankful to have the type of conversations that we are having here, so that we can actually use it in order to project our voice and help this country move forward.
Thank you, Anh Bảo Kỳ. I think that's a good conclusion for our conference today. And unless anybody else have something to say, I'm going to hope that we can continue the conversation moving forward with a lot of good panelists here, a lot of good leaders here, and everything that you brought up, sharing with us. Regarding what Anh Vũ Bảo Kỳ just said, I feel hopeful. I feel very hopeful that you are still there. You're the core, in a way, the core leaders inside the party. And I know that Georgia, leadership of Georgia are Republicans. And if you all get together and make sure that you hold out the principles of the party against other, maybe we can keep the platform in the right way. And I also was very happy that you listened to Representative Bee Nguyen, who represent the other side of the poor people. And we probably can feel that she was very passionate and she was being moved by seeing people suffering. So now we can see both sides, and hopefully as Vietnamese Americans listening to the young people who are it, I must say, and they give us hope. So I hope that we will carry this conversation forward, and we will have more events. Thank you. It's a good way to look back and move forward. So we have looked back. Now it's time to move forward. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Have a good Sunday.